Michael Saylor and Strategy back in the trenches with another Bitcoin buy, but nonetheless, acquiring more than 6,500 Bitcoin for more than $500 million at 84,785. But some people are flagging that now Saylor getting close to like 2.7% of all the Bitcoin mined. Kind of a big question in terms of whether or not it becomes more of a negative than a positive. Welcome into another episode of Coinage. I'm your host, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios here in New York City. Good to be with you. Good to have you with us as we are watching Bitcoin right now cross the $87,000 mark, a mark that a lot of people have been hoping to see for quite some time after we saw that breakout. And the chart does not look too bad, folks. When you think about where we're at on the weekly, perhaps zooming out to the monthly, maybe shows you why this level is important to watch. In terms of what could happen this week, a lot of news, a lot of Fed speak, and a lot of people wrapping their heads around what we heard from Jeff Park from Bitwise on the show. If you haven't watched that interview, I'd go back and watch that one as people wrap their head around the dollar coming down, as people wrap their head around Trump's strategy to get interest rates to come down. A lot of macro themes continuing to play out and kind of got to give it time. But exciting to see, at the very least, perhaps some early innings around crypto. And when I say crypto, I mostly mean Bitcoin, breaking from what we've seen in the stock market. So exciting to see that forming, and going to continue to explore that theme per usual this week with all the Fed speak on the docket. Outside of that, a lot of things to get into in terms of this war shaping up between Solana and Base. We're going to dig into that, as well as checking in on the latest of the story we've been tracking for quite some time now, Mantra. And taking a look at that one, seeing that chart, of course, it was a pretty nasty and aggressive move to the downside after that $5 billion collapse. The token shed about 90% in that one. And we are seeing new plans from them roll out around a token burn. You can see there on the chart, though, not doing much. We discussed that last week with the analyst who called that collapse 3 days before it happened. We'll play a little bit of what we heard from him as to why he would not be buying and warned us that any token burn might not move anything. And that is kind of what we're seeing play out. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the Base ecosystem after Jesse Pollock has gone full-throated in terms of throwing his support behind content coins, I should say, and what we're seeing play out there with Zora. Activity picking up quite a bit, and let's not forget that this week we'll see a pretty important token drop. Perhaps a lot of what we've seen play out on the content coin front makes a little bit more sense when you consider that we will see an airdrop coming from the platform that Jesse has been talking about so frequently, and potentially what that means for Solana, why they're very different, and why that could mean something for us here at Coinage. I will just tease ahead to that slightly if you're just tuning in for the first time. Perhaps worthy of noting that Coinage is not just a community-owned show controlled by NFT holders, but also that Coinage launched a meme coin not too long ago, inspired by, damn, I always get this wrong, Texas. I never get the shoulder right. Inspired by our YouTube Play Button Award that we won over here for crossing 100,000 subscribers. So if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, go ahead and do that. If you're just tuning in now, throw a like on the space and retweet it so we can get some more peeps in here as we cover the biggest headlines in crypto, as we always do on Mondays. If you miss it, we recap it in our newsletter. But before we get into the show today, I want to give a thank you to our sponsor, that of course being Stacks. We appreciate the support from Stacks and want to tell you a little bit about it because Bitcoin's $1 trillion potential is untapped, and Stacks unlocks it. You can convert your BTC to SBTC and earn up to 5% APY in Bitcoin. No custodians, just trustless DeFi, your Bitcoin working harder. Bet on Bitcoin's future today with Stacks. And now, as we shift into the show, a couple things to run through. Why don't we stick on the Bitcoin theme too? Because as we're seeing this all play out, important to highlight a man who is always buying the top and proud of it. Michael Saylor and Strategy back in the trenches with another Bitcoin buy. Can I call that the trenches relative to the trenches we're all in? Probably not, but nonetheless, acquiring more than 6,500 Bitcoin for more than $500 million at 84,785. So in the green on that purchase, based on where we're trading right now. But some people are flagging that now Saylor getting close to, I think, pretty sure, I can't remember the exact number, but like close to like 2.7% of all the Bitcoin mined. And at some point, whether or not that flips to being more of a negative than a positive. And I don't know. I don't necessarily know where crypto is on that issue. Kind of curious. If you're watching this now, throw a comment on your thoughts here into the chat, because I've heard mixed feelings on that one. Whether or not people really care or not, or if they just want to see number go up, kind of a big question in terms of whether or not it becomes more of a negative than a positive, because I suppose at some point it might. From Kaleo, this is kind of the tweet I was referencing there. MicroStrategy, although now known as Strategy. Kaleo needs to update a little bit of that. But 2.7 Bitcoin in all of circulation. And, you know, if Saylor's ploy continues to work the way it has, you'd expect that number to increase quite a bit. And so, I don't know, there could be something there. I do want to pull up Saylor Tracker just to point this out. But again, the reason why it matters is less because of strategy. So I don't want to focus too much on them, but more, dare I say, because of strategy and how it's spilling over into other companies as they try and replicate what Michael Saylor has done at Strategy, including the likes of GameStop and a few others, Metaplanet, also continuing to buy Bitcoin. So as that theme catches on, maybe it does matter less in terms of how fast Saylor and Strategy are acquiring Bitcoin, because, you know, if other companies are keeping pace, or at least the size and amount of companies trying to keep pace, as that continues to grow, theoretically, all of those companies would begin to outpace Strategy if it works the same way. And we are kind of seeing a little bit of that, at least in terms of early innings. So I don't want to focus and harp too much on the panic around Saylor owning so much Bitcoin. But if you look at the Saylor Tracker, always interesting to kind of think about where he's at and where this company's at with some of those bets. Right now, on paper, it's north now of $10 billion. People always dunk on the fact that, oh, Saylor's only up 29%. Yeah, but it's in the billions. This size is what we're talking about, and it's hard to keep that up the larger your portfolio grows. So to be up 30% on that all-time, north of $10 billion in paper profits, not too shabby, and perhaps part of the reason why we are seeing companies step up and want to copy a little bit more of that. But nonetheless, Texas, I think we had the other chart that Sean Farrell put together in terms of like the trend line and where we're at. This is mainly the reason why. It's not overly, hugely technical, and I would, again, caution our viewers, the only technical charts I really care about in terms of maybe giving them any credence whatsoever would be Bitcoin's chart, just in terms of the size of it all. And even that, as we talk about on the show, even that can be thrown off by a Saylor buy or two. So, again, caution anyone who's in crypto only relying on technicals and completely getting rid of fundamentals, especially on some of these niche projects. Because as we covered with some of the other ones, including Mantra, that does matter from time to time. And perhaps it's a good segue into that one right now, as it was one of those projects we did cover. A lot of people hadn't necessarily heard of it since it's based over there in Dubai and not listed on a lot of U.S. exchanges, and perhaps as we saw that $5 billion collapse play out last week, with good reason, because a lot of it was low volume trading, low float. And after that $5 billion collapse again, the chart, we'll just pull it up because it does look ugly. We did see Mantra come out with at least a little bit of a strategy around how they want to fix things, if you want to call it that. And the company project, real world asset-based blockchain project, coming out with plans to burn 300 million Ohm tokens. If you are to look at JP Mullen, the founder there, his tweet detailing what Ohm is going to be burned here, saying it's just a first step in rebuilding trust with the community, but far from the last. In total, that is 300 million Ohm tokens being burned. And this is where, again, we had talked about this on the show, and the analyst who had dug into this told us as to why he would be a little bit skeptical of any token burn plans, because again, the issue wasn't necessarily, well, every time we talk about this, it's supply and demand. The issue was kind of getting people to want to use the tokens. And as we talked about last time, if you haven't watched that interview, there was an ability to convert old tokens into new tokens one-to-one. And so the purpose of kind of lockups were a little bit muted relative to the way that they normally work for new projects, because if you lock those tokens up, which we will get into in a second here with our own meme coin and play button, and why those things definitely matter. Because if you got 600 million tokens floating around on the open market that anyone can convert into your new tokens, that's not really a token lock now, is it? And so we had heard from the analyst who had called this collapse 3 days before it happened, and just want to play a little bit of what we heard from Hedgeye's Assad on that topic in terms of why he would not be buying here. And now we get the token burn announcement, so perhaps the same logic stands, perhaps the same warning stands, but here's what he told us just a few days ago. Take a listen.
I personally probably would stay away from this one because of permanent reputation damage, and clearly I would say an incompetent team. I'm not big on hugely relying on the team to carry my crypto project to the moon, but JP Mullen, I think his responses in the interviews with CoffeeZilla and you on Coinage really go to show I don't think he really knows what he's doing.
So he doesn't know what he's doing was the takeaway there. Of course, we had JP on the show, so if you want to hear from the other side, you can go back and look at that interview too. But overall, I think right now the market reacting in the same way and saying that Ish on that point was right, because no movement really to talk about whatsoever. Even if you look on the daily, not much moving there on that one. And again, I think it's because burns can do only so much unless you're tying them to a little bit of the equation on the other side, which is demand. And if that's not there, as we've seen in the past, burns are liked only when they're paired with some of the other mechanics around tokenomics or marketing, whatever you want to kind of talk about in terms of getting both sides of that equation correct, which we will get into later on a little bit. We'll call our own number and talk a little bit about our meme coin play button in a bit. But first, I want to chat a little bit more about Base and Solana, because this was the talk of the town as it played out late last week as Base launched their new push with content coins. If you haven't checked it out yet, I do think it is important to maybe talk a little bit about this. Actually, Texas, you're going to be impressed with this segue we got in our hands today, because Jesse was talking a lot about these things. You can mint them on Zora. Essentially, their push is trying to convert anything that is a piece of content into a coin with Zora. Of course, the big, I guess you could call them, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say they want to be a layer 3. But this idea of kind of turning all pieces of content into coins, which is very different than meme coins and what we've seen play out in Solana land. It's a little bit of kind of a two-headed monster in terms of both of them kind of being the same or similar in the sense of you've got meme coins on one hand that don't really have any inherent value, and on the other hand, you got content coins that also technically don't have any true inherent value, but both of them derive their value from attention. And so it's a very interesting thing to see two different projects and ecosystem take two different stances on how they can A, drive users to care about these things, but then B, also see activity on their chain, which is inherently where most of crypto, and why we talk about most of crypto, is because all of these blockchains or projects and ecosystems are trying to get people to use their chain, to have activity on their chain, to show something on their chain. And for Base, that is what content coins are all about. So let's take a look at those, because we launched one of them, pairing the dots. This is what I was talking about, Texas. We launched a clip. I should say because it was technically my launch here. We're looking at it. This is the clip, a clip of JP Mullen on Zora. I was kind of curious how this would go because, again, we experiment around here. And so we put this up. Market cap came down quite a bit. The interesting thing is they don't really show the chart. So it's not necessarily kind of, again, very dissimilar from the Solana ecosystem in terms of traders and the way that they kind of want you to look at the price of it all. More so kind of consumer driven in terms of, hey, launch a piece of content, have it go out there on chain. Kind of confused. And then looking at earnings over here, this is kind of how much came from all this. $40 kind of, I guess, would have gone to me. And then if I sold this coin, that would be kind of added into creator earnings. Of course, that would come at the detriment, I suppose, of the other holders. And so that's kind of the interesting piece of this, is that it's similar to meme coins, but it's also not meme coins because they're content coins. And so you could ask yourself, what's really going on and why does this matter? And I think that's where we get to this article over here, which is all about Zora's token launch coming up on Wednesday. And if you put the pieces together, pretty solid push in terms of everyone talking about Base and content coins heading into Zora's token launch, which is kind of exactly where you want to be when it comes to activity and attention going back to the platform and who Base is trying to support here. But in that push, Jesse did kind of walk into a little bit of the sauce because, as we saw play out, when you try and promote everybody, you can run into some issues. And one of those was that Base took a little liberty with the idea. And I guess I should be clear, this wasn't Base. This wasn't Base's marketing team specifically. Yes, this is the apology that Jesse had, Texas. But before we get to that, important context from our friend Jackie here, who had seen a few of these things that were on there. People took issue with some of this. And again, this was a piece of art that Jesse had shared trying to support people on Base that was here saying Base is for pimping and Base is for squirting. A lot of people were very confused. And of course, when you pair those together, those do look a little stranger than they may have been if they were just one-offs. But when you pair them together, that was kind of a lot of people were saying, yo, what's going on over here, Base? And, Jesse originally defended this, saying, look, we want to support all creators who are launching coins. And then eventually came out and clarified his stance that this was just one creator. And he was trying to protect their right to be provocative on Base. And again, that is kind of where this starts to get interesting, because you have Solana in their own ecosystem that can do what they want in terms of, they're kind of shepherding what projects they want to exist, somewhat also being led by the foundation and the community on that side. And then you've got Base on their side, which Jesse is also part of the executive team at Coinbase, and they're trying to push their own pieces of their own ecosystem players. And doing so, and again, a similar kind of idea with content coins, but not all too dissimilar from what we're seeing Solana do with meme coins. And the idea there is showing activity on chain. And that's important to highlight because, again, what we did see, and at least as Jesse's highlighting it, I got to say, I can't necessarily find this chart replicated outside of Jesse's tweet here, which I'm pulling up. It mostly just shows activity on what I believe is Zora's platform. But it's a little bit different than, I suppose, just showing activity across Base entirely. And if you zoom out, I'm not entirely sure if it's fair to say that this will be the continued theme. And we see this all the time. In fact, you could probably talk about the same thing at Kaido after their token drop. And what happened there is you had a lot of people excited about the token drop, and then everything kind of falls off a cliff. People forget about the platform, and it goes away. That's kind of how these things go. That's why token drops can sometimes be messed up. But this was essentially the chart that Jesse was trying to convey, is that, you've got a huge surge in activity right before we see a token drop for Zora on Wednesday. And, that's kind of what you're looking at there, is daily transacting users. And that's a big run up, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily matched with what we're seeing on a bunch of the other Dune dashboards. Over time, at least from what I'm seeing, the trend is still down and to the right. And so who knows? Maybe it's just the early innings of content coins. I don't think it's fair to say we're going to get a clear image of that after just a few days of Jesse and the squad and Zora pushing the idea of content coins, because I will say this much, and I think it's important to highlight. We learned this, and again, maybe I'm really earning my salary today, Texas, on transitions. But we learned this ourselves. When you launch a meme coin, it does carry the expectation of like, hey, what are you going to do for us in this ecosystem you've created? But let's not kid ourselves. And I think it's fair to say the same way for content coins. I don't think you're necessarily creating an ecosystem when you're launching either A, content coin, or B, a meme coin, because they are PvP at the end of the day, which a lot of people were highlighting with content coins. I get what they're trying to do in terms of, hey, if you like this piece of content, you buy it, and you're creating kind of an ecosystem of fans around that piece of content. I don't necessarily know if that's the right way to go for a lot of reasons, because, again, as we've highlighted here many and many times, and if you're already a Coinage member, you know this, but creating a wrapper around all of the content is very different, and that's kind of what we've done here in terms of having memberships that allow people to co-own Coinage with us and all of the IP. whether Coinage lives on YouTube or it lives on our site, wherever it lives, doesn't just need to live on Zora, is a very different proposition than perhaps what either meme coins or content coins can offer. And I'll just say that I think that that might be a better way to form community. At least we've learned that, whether it's through what we've done or through our experiment that we launched on Zora, or, to be fair, whether it's our experiment that we launched on Solana, which we'll get into now because we've tried all these things. And I'm speaking to you honestly as a founder who has been through all of these things. Where the hell did my chart go? Texas over here. I can't find it anymore. Here we go. Who has tried with these different ecosystems. And again, we're in the arena and we're just kind of transparently showing you what we learned. I just showed you transparently. We're in $40 on that one content coin. And I think increasingly as we see more and more of those launched, you're going to get what Jesse wants, which is people are going to care less about the price. We're going to see more of them launched, and you're going to have more of these things floating around, which will be very good for activity on chain. Might not necessarily be great for the idea of number go up, which in meme coin land, as we're showing you there, isn't always guaranteed either. But I think the real question of a lot of people in crypto should be, well, what are we doing here? Because if it's just number go up, as we've covered at least 1,000,000 times on this friggin' show, is that if that's all you want, there's the stock market for that. But if you're looking to form community and ownership and what we're doing here at Coinage, you really can't do that with that world. And so I think it has been really fun to see NFTs plugged into this. That way we can partner with other communities that are on chain. That way we can have interoperability in a way you can't have if it's just a standard kind of token or security putting in someone's portfolio. So it's been exciting to see how this all shapes up differently. And of course, one final point before we get into kind of where we're going with Play Button, I do just want to kind of bring up this one point around one user flagging some of these projects that have launched on Base and kind of what some of what they're trying to do in seeding this is. I think there is a pretty good strategy, and I do want to give a shout out to Base and the Coinbase team because it does really seem like Jesse is using his platform to push these narratives at the right time. And we saw that with the Kaido drop because that airdrop was pretty significant for a lot of people. And of course, a lot of people dumped it right after it happened. But these airdrops are stacking up quite a bit. And so you do have the Zora one coming up on Wednesday. I think that's what it is, right? Texas is what we said. Pretty sure. April 23rd. Yeah, that seems like Wednesday. And so, there is a lot to be said about some of this going from one thing to the next. And whether or not it sustains itself is another question. But at the very least, there are things to get in on if you're just sitting there as an airdrop farmer in the Base ecosystem. And so a lot of that is cooking. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the same thing weren't happening in the Solana ecosystem. And so that is where we come to our own existence over on the Solana side with our meme coin Play Button, which I do want to give credit to the critics out there. I want to give credit to my haters and our haters. Anyone who hates on Coinage, look, you're talking about us. You're giving us some love. No matter how hard you wanna, you can't avoid us because we're everywhere. And so I give you the option. You can co-own us, you can mint an NFT and join our family, or you can hate on us and spread the good word and gospel of Coinage no matter how hard you try and fight it, because there's no escaping us. And really, what I mean by that is we launched this meme coin not too long ago. Again, the reason as to why, you can check out the series on Play Button and kind of how we got here. But I think it is interesting to step back and think about where we go from here and what Coinage ourselves want to do with the meme coin from here. And that, admittedly, we haven't shared too much about, and that is partially because we do a lot of other things here. And so anytime, we track down big interviews like we had with Mantra, or do anything relating to our DAO governance, it does take a little bit of time, I think you live by the sword, you die by the sword, and to our credit, we are a functioning DAO. And so some of these things do take time to get approved. And what I'm about to say here, just to be clear on the legal front, is more to share with our members who are currently maybe not aware of the vote that is going on, which is to approve some of these changes. And so one of those things is kind of communicating to people what we had already communicated before, which is the idea of read, watch, own, and burning certain tokens. And you could say, Zach, why the hell would we be talking about a token burn when you just talked about how it didn't work for Ohm and Mantra and how nobody cares about token burns? And I would say, That is fair. I would be somewhat of a hypocrite if I just told you, hey, look at this project over here that's doing a token burn that didn't work. And now look at you guys trying to do a token burn. However, I think it is an important distinction to point out that part of the criticisms that we just got like 2 or 3 weeks ago, which was, how come Coinage owns all these tokens? And I think that that's a very important distinction between having a token burn when all the tokens are already out there on the open market, as it was the case with Mantra, and with us, which was we fair launched this token and a bunch of people yeeted after the launch, and now Coinage has a bunch of these tokens, and we're saying, well, what do we want to do with them? And you can do a couple things, and I'm speaking openly and honestly and transparently, because you can do what Mantra did, and you can try and find market makers, and you can pursue that path, and you can give these tokens to a lot of people through OTC deals, and you can do what CoffeeZilla called out, and you can pump the price, and price can go up. And then eventually a day will come when, guess what, price doesn't go up anymore. And a lot of the people who bought in because they thought price was up get screwed. And that is one path to go. And you can see that play out over time if you really want to. And that path looks a little bit like this. And if that's not good, and if that's wrong, what's the alternative path? And I will tell you that the alternative path looks a little bit like this, which is, maybe token don't go up a shit ton over a year to get a lot of attention and things. Maybe token just trade sideways for a little bit. Maybe token be open and transparent and honest for a little bit. And maybe that's what we at Coinage are trying to do with this whole series, which again, admittedly, is going to be different. And so if you're scared by a meme coin looking different, I would not recommend this project to be on your radar whatsoever. But if you want to look for something that is a little bit different than the other chart I just showed you, well, then let me inform you with what's going on with Play Button, because right now there is an open DAO vote. And again, I'm only mentioning this less for anybody outside the DAO, more so for anybody who's watching this and is a Coinage member and who has to vote on this to be considered an active DAO member. Because some people are like, hey, when are these votes going to happen? I joined. When can I vote? Well, guess what? There's an active vote right now that you can participate in, which is this one. Oh, that's not it. Which is this one over here, our DAO vote, which is currently active, DAO vote 13, our plans with Play Button. And again, if you're not aware of what Read, Watch, Own is all about, is that we rack up and track our views that this currently is getting on X alongside all of our content on YouTube. And we track that, and we will be burning tokens monthly. And you might say, how many tokens will you be burning monthly? And that's what this Dune Analytics Tracker is all about. Over time, we will be approaching a 400 million token burn, which is pretty significant. And again, this only goes into effect if this DAO vote passes, but right now it's considerably in the lead. So I don't necessarily feel too bad about saying that this probably will pass. So that's news. And then also in terms of how we're calculating these, it is not just a linear burn over time. So in fact, we are trying to do a little bit of what happens on pump.fun with a little bonding curve, not to get too geeky, but if you do want to get geeky, the formula of this bonding curve is also listed on the Dune Analytics platform. And we're also, if this again passes, a lot of people were saying, hey, Coinage can dump. Coinage can dump your tokens at any time. Well, guess what? We haven't sold jack shit. So real quick mention for the haters out there. I think this whole thing has been very exciting. And honestly, we could write 8 pages on what this experiment has taught me personally. But we've created all this technology for kind of trustless systems, which are definitely needed. Don't get me wrong. Trustless DeFi, very much a real thing. Very much needed. On the meme coin space, I think a lot of people kind of across the board assume that you can't trust anybody, which is probably fair in the meme coin space. But I think it is interesting to think about comparing a project like Coinage to other things in the meme coin space. Is that when I said we hadn't sold anything and have no plans to sell anything, I really meant that we hadn't sold anything and had no plans to sell anything. And so I guess because people want it, it's good to say when exactly will these things be locked up for how long, and we probably could have done that sooner. Admittedly, probably when we were doing a fair launch, could have thrown that out. But it wasn't necessarily top of mind and top of priority in terms of rolling this out and explaining kind of where we want to go with this, because we just won the Play Button and we wanted to tokenize it with our community. So we didn't necessarily think about all these things up front. And so for that, I will say, sure, if you want to criticize us for that, you can. But nonetheless, we are out here now with a dashboard that shows you what will be approved if this DAO vote is approved. which it is looking that way. And so I only mention it because if you are a Coinage member, this is the early alpha and call for you to go vote on this right now. If you think it's a good idea, a bad idea, it's up to you. It's not up to me. And I think that's important for a lot of the haters out there who don't really understand how Coinage works or why these things take time, or again, why it's not necessarily me making these calls, but me as part of the community making these calls. And I appreciate everyone who's voted in it. So that is what's going on with Play Button and the Read, Watch, Own bonding curve tied to content, which I'm pretty sure is the first time ever. So not only do you get rewarded for watching this because hopefully you've learned something, but now also each time you do watch Coinage content, Play Button will be burned. There will be fewer tokens out there. And that's not even talking about other plans that we might have on the marketing side, which admittedly we also are cooking on. So I just throw that out there because it is interesting to see this war between Solana and Base, meme coins versus content coins. They both can coexist. They're both very different, as we're learning here, because I made 40 bucks on the content coin, and the DAO made, I don't know what it made necessarily, but closer to like 80,000, I think, to cook with on the marketing side. And so we've transparently thrown all this out there for you. You have information. Now you're aware of what we're trying to do on the Read, Watch, Own, Play Button, token burn, tied back to how much you love and view our content. So I'll close with this. If you enjoyed this episode of Coinage, we do this every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. You can share this with other people so they can learn a little bit more, not only just about us, but about the top stories in Web3, as we highlight, as we always do, on Coinage.media, where you can co-own Coinage with us and see the top stories in crypto. For everybody here at Coinage, for myself, I'm Zach Guzman, signing off. We'll see you again soon.